We share DNA. So in Hannibal, those Africans were in Italy. Hannibal's people met some of Morante's people. And I accept mine. He cannot accept it. But he and I are going to have a conversation now. Not only over pizza, but maybe over, say, pork chops. Continuing.
1 minute.
Quote, they started less to see race as genetic and more a question of culture and physical appearance. Since I'm running out of time, they were the ones who said that race is a matter of genetics, that it's in our genes as black people and therefore we're inferior. But now that they've got the same, quote, inferior genes, it's not genetic anymore, it's what you see in the mirror. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Wishart, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Crawford, for bringing this important, timely legislation. I rise in strong support of LB 1078. I did want to take a moment. Senator Crawford spoke about the Inspector General's report and the recommendations she'd made, and we have a package of legislation that have been brought supporting some of those recommendations that the Inspector General made. And so I did want to take a brief moment to speak about a piece of legislation that I introduced this year and that fell within the Health and Human Services Committee, and that I'm working hard to get passed out of the committee and hopefully passed this year. I introduced LB 1041 in response to the 2017 report of investigation by the Office of the Inspector General of Nebraska Child Welfare that found that 50 children who were state wards, placed in licensed facilities, or placed in adoptive and guardian homes were sexually abused between July 2013 and October 2016. And I would encourage the committee to read the full report if you've not already. As tough as it is to get through, it is an important guideline to help us as policymakers determine how we can improve our child welfare system and the safety of the most vulnerable people in its care. So through the Julie Rogers investigation, they used, in the cases that they used, they started to identify systemic issues that hinder DHHS and the child welfare system in their ability to appropriately prevent and respond to cases of child sexual abuse. And so the OIG made 18 recommendations to the Department for system improvements. The Department accepted 11 of those recommendations, and I want to thank them for their effort to move forward on some of these recommendations. However, I feel that some of the recommendations that were not accepted by the Department are still needed. LB 1041 addresses recommendation 15 from the OIG's report that was rejected by the Department. LB 1041 requires the Department to include a specific component of child sexual abuse prevention in foster and kinship training. And I do want to take just a brief moment to read that recommendation. So to obtain a foster care license, a licensee is required to complete 21 hours of training prior to licensure and 12 hours annually to renew this license. The Department may waive the licensing required training for relatives seeking approval to become foster parents. For most prospective foster parents, the training is contained in a curriculum called Trauma-Informed Parenting for Safety and Permanence and Deciding Together. And for relative and kinship placements, training is not required. And I just want to emphasize that. For relative and kinship placements, no training is required. However, the Nebraska Foster and Adoptive Parent Association has prepared a voluntary training curriculum called the Kinship Connection. Both programs that foster parents go through when they're training to become licensed, they do address the additional needs of children that have been sexually abused prior to placement. Both training curricula contain guidance for foster parents on what to do when foster children make false sexual abuse allegations against them. I know this because I went through the training to become a foster parent 3 years ago. But having been through it, I do realize that the training is lacking in terms of supporting foster parents and addressing much more in terms of sexual abuse prevention. The training contains little to no information on the dynamics of child sexual abuse, appropriate boundaries, the elevated risk of sexual abuse for youth in our foster care system, reporting sexual abuse, how to identify and respond to worrisome behavior that may indicate sexual abuse has occurred, and other important topics related to preventing sexual abuse of children in care. In 14 of 37 of the child sexual abuse cases that the OIG reviewed in foster and adoptive homes, caregivers dismissed sexual abuse allegations that children made as false or failed to report them to authorities. And I just want to emphasize that with the remaining time I have. In 14 of the 37 child sexual abuse cases that the OIG reviewed in foster and adoptive homes, caregivers dismissed sexual abuse allegations that children made as false or failed to report them to authorities. I would say that is a breakdown in our system. And so I hope this body will support this important legislation, and I hope I'll be back with LB 1041. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator Christ, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraska. I'll be very, very, very brief. If you look at the committee summary for LB 1078, you will see that we are not just concerned with those children that are in the Department of Health and Human Services. We are concerned with those children who are in the system in general, those who have lost their freedoms or they have been assigned to foster care situations, they're in probation, across the board. One of the things that this body dealt with years ago was the disparity in the way we treated a child that may or may not have been in the deep end of the system, the shallow end of the system, the foster care system, and now we need to pay attention to a child no matter where they are within the system. I applaud 1078 for the content, Senator Crawford, and I would ask you to support LB 1078. I know between now and select there's some discussion about further subject matter to be defined, and I look forward to that discussion as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Christ. Senator Chambers, you're recognized.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the legislature, I can finish this article in the time that I have, and then, as I said, I'll withdraw that pending motion. Oh, and I'm strongly in favor of the bill. But if such is possible, I'm more concerned about my people, because we have children also, and they're even worse treated than children in general. Continuing with the World Herald article, the project found certain groups, younger people and families, for example, to be more open to the news. Quote, women just tend to be more flexible in terms of racial identification, unquote, Foreman said. DNA test results can present an intriguing puzzle. When a significant amount of African DNA shows up in a presumably white person, quote, there's usually a story. Either a parent moved away or a grandparent died young, unquote, said Angela Trammell, T-R-M-M-E-L, an investigative genealogist. Quote, usually a story of mystery disappearance dash something, unquote. For Pursley, 46, the link turned out to be her grandfather, who had moved away from his native Georgia and started a new life passing as white in Michigan. For white people who don't know, that, when you pass, you're a black person and you pass into the white race and they don't even know what you are, and they say a lot of things to you not knowing that you're really black, because again, black is not color. That's how we find out so much about how little white people respect us, what they really think about us, because the one sitting next to you may be passing. But what has happened on occasion, it sounds like a joke, but it's not. Two people sitting next to each other will be talking, and one will say, well, you know, we call what you're doing passing. The other one say, yeah, we recognize each other, don't we, because you passing too. And both of them were, quote, passing. Shows how idiotic white people are. You don't even know who you're talking to. Some of you all in here may be passing, and I hope I won't spill the beans on you, and I won't. Maybe. I'm going to start that paragraph again. For Pursley 46, the link turned out to be her grandfather, who had moved away from his native Georgia and started a new life passing as white in Michigan. He married a white woman who bore Pursley's father. But in researching his genealogy, Pursley discovered that her grandfather's brother continued to identify as African American back in Macon and became a celebrated architect. A recent genetic test confirmed that Pursley's DNA is about 8% African. Quote, "That was a bombshell revelation for me and my family," said Pursley. She doubts that her father knew. Oh, he knew. I put that in. "I don't think he would have been pleased, ... I'm absolutely proud of my genealogy and my heritage, but I think my father would have thought I was dishonoring his father because it was a secret and I dug it up," unquote. Her mother was flabbergasted. Her jaw dropped. Pursley said, and she said, "Oh my gosh, I was married to a black man and I didn't even know it. But thank God for the happenstance." I just add that little bit for lightening of the mood. She did say by this quote, "I was married to a black man and I didn't even know it." How can you be married to somebody and you don't even know? White society is based on insanity. Continuing, Pursley now recalls hints in her father that remind her of black friends and make her sad about connections that were lost. Quote, "To me, that's the real tragedy of it," she said. His father had to completely reinvent himself and cut everyone in his family off, and that's so tragic. America is a land of tragedy. America cannot face reality. I told you about Brother Morante. Like the Bible would say, that which was lost has now been found. That which was estranged has now been reconnected. So when I refer to Brother Morante as Brother Morante, we're brothers, under the skin and down to our very DNA. And he might acknowledge it. Thank you, Mr. President, and I do support this bill. And I withdraw that motion.
Thank you, Senator Chamber. Without objection, so noted. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Crawford, you're welcome to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, those children who are in our care, in the child welfare system and the juvenile justice system are our responsibility. And it's come to our attention through the